Dear friends, I welcome you to my channel. This is Taras Berezovets. Today we will talk about the results of the latest strikes on Russian territory. This is stated by none other than the Ministry of Defense of Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine may have received from Her Majesty's government, the government of the United Kingdom, an additional number of Storm Shadow cruise missiles. This is reported by the influential American agency Bloomberg, citing sources in the government of Keir Starmer. Meanwhile, the State Duma is considering a bill that would reclassify the terrorist movement Taliban from all terrorist to non-terrorist. Well, basically, the Taliban and the Russians have long been brothers. No one hides this, and the course for the legalization of the terrorist organization Taliban has long been chosen in the Kremlin. Among others, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Reich, Sergei Lavrov, has already met with them. Meanwhile, the so-called Danish model of arms procurement is beginning to gain more and more scale. It is about the scheme, which was first implemented by the government of Denmark. It concerns the procurement of weapons directly from Ukrainian manufacturers. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported the start of an investigation into the use of 120mm mines. It concerns their malfunctioning. This investigation is in the implementation stage. The Washington Post reports that Biden is trying to strengthen Ukraine's position before Trump's return to the White House. By the way, Fox News, traditionally more sympathetic to Republicans and Donald Trump, also reported that a special representative for Ukraine will likely be appointed soon. It could be career diplomat Richard Grenell. However, this decision is not final, and representatives of Trump's circle view the war in Ukraine as one of the top priorities that the new administration will address. That is, there is no underestimation of the risk of war among the new U.S. president's circle. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that despite Putin's ultimatum and Oreshkin's threats, the armed forces of Ukraine struck twice with ATACMS missiles at targets in the Kursk region, one of which concerns a strike on a Russian S-400 missile division near the settlement of Lotarevka, and the second airfield is Kursk-Vostokny, near the settlement of Kalina. In both cases, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation claims that ballistic missiles were used. Russia used a record number of drones to strike Ukrainian territory. Last night, 188 drones were used. Such a number has never been seen before. Since February 24, 2022, 4 ballistic missiles have been used primarily against energy civilian facilities on the territory of Ukraine. Most of the drones were shot down or they were lost in location due to the actions of electronic warfare systems. There has been a change in the Russian military command. Instead of the commander of the Russian group of troops in the south, Colonel General Gennady Anashkin, Lieutenant General Alexander Sanchik has been appointed as the acting commander, and in Vilnius they are investigating the causes of the crash of a DHL cargo plane. It is assumed that either human error could be the cause of the crash, or it could still be sabotage. So the British government has transferred a certain number of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. The publication Bloomberg, citing informed sources in the government, Prime Minister Keir Starmer reports on several dozen missiles. However, the exact number is not specified. At the same time, the influential defense publication Jane's Defense reported that at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the arsenal of Her Majesty's Army had about 822 Storm Shadow missiles. And since then, the British Ministry of Defense has not ordered new supplies from the Anglo-French company MBDA. The number of missiles transferred is unknown. Naturally, this is a matter of military secrecy, but even several dozen missiles can inflict the most devastating damage, especially when it comes to destroying command posts or Russian air defense systems, which we will discuss next. Storm Shadows were sent to Ukraine several weeks ago. As is always the case, there were no reports or announcements. It is reported that the transfer occurred even before the governments of the USA and the UK allowed Ukraine to strike military targets on Russian territory with long-range missiles. Prior to this, sources from the British The Times and the UK Ministry of Defence reported that supplies of long-range Storm Shadow missiles had been halted due to the depletion of their own stocks. However, this may not be entirely true. let's say, rather misleading, which is a typical example of the fog of war. Putin has repeatedly expressed threats, as well as threats from his entourage towards the UK government. Dmitry Leonidovich has generally threatened retaliatory strikes with nuclear weapons against London if all this does not stop. However, recently he lowered the level of escalation, stating that no one intends to use nuclear weapons, as there are no madmen in the Russian government. However, this is not the case, and we can see this in the example of the following decision. A group of State Duma deputies and Federation Council members proposed amendments that allow for the suspension of the ban on the activities of terrorist organizations in Russia. In particular, the corresponding bill has already been registered on the State Duma's website. The explanatory note states that the mechanism for judicial bans on terrorist organizations is provided for by the federal law on countering terrorism. Behind all these words, the escapades conceal the intention to remove the movement Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations. Interestingly, the authors of this bill include deputies, in particular Russian Special Services officer Andrei Lugovoy, who poisoned former FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko, leading to his death in Britain, and Vasily Peskarev, as well as Senator Andrei Klishas, who has also been repeatedly noted for playing along with Russian Special Services. In recent years, the Kremlin has repeatedly spoken about the need to exclude the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations. In particular, in 2021, Putin stated that Russia is close to excluding the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations, but this must be done by the UN Security Council. In November 2024, Shoigu met with the Deputy Prime Minister of Afghanistan, Abdullah Ghani Berezovets. Borodaron Akund, who is also a representative of the terrorist movement Taliban, stated that Moscow will do everything and make efforts to exclude the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations. And the fact that, as they say, a fisherman recognizes another fisherman, or rather a terrorist recognizes another terrorist from afar, no longer a secret to anyone. Meanwhile, as the influential American conservative The Wall Street Journal writes, Western countries are increasingly beginning to use the so-called Danish model. The issue is that due to the inability to produce sufficient weapons for Ukraine and difficulties in procurement, a number of EU countries have started financing Ukrainian arms manufacturers, as the Ukrainian defense industry is loaded at no more than 30%, since the Ukrainian government has no money to purchase weapons from its own defense companies. Following the Danish government, Lithuania, Sweden, and Norway also began to adopt the Danish model. They allocated funds. Several countries have expressed interest, said Denmark's Minister of Defense, Troels Lund Poulsen. The Wall Street Journal reports that Germany and the Netherlands are also applying a similar Danish model. They are now directly signing contracts with Ukrainian defense organizations. The Financial Times also reports that money is now starting to flow not only into the production of drones, which have long been the largest contracts, but also into the production of other types of weapons manufactured in Ukrainian factories, which naturally have secret production hidden due to Russian missile strikes. Russian intelligence is constantly trying to pay for information to determine the locations of Ukrainian weapons production, primarily cruise ballistic missiles. And because of this, companies are naturally forced to successfully hide their operations and continue to fulfill multi-billion phone contracts, even despite the ongoing hostilities and attempts to determine their location. Denmark has already allocated $680 million for weapons production in Ukraine, 180 from its own funds, and 400 million in the form of interest from frozen Russian assets. That is, they are correctly using the frozen Russian assets. Norway has allocated 42 so far. Sweden more than 20 million. Next year, Ukraine is expected to receive at least $1.4 billion under the Danish model. So we see how this model is starting to be successfully implemented. It is indeed the right one. Moreover, it leads to the loading of Ukrainian enterprises and tax contributions. People have good stable salaries, permanent jobs, and most importantly, weapons are being supplied to the armed forces of Ukraine. Nevertheless, against this backdrop, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, amid the scandal over the supply of 120 mm mines, stated that the Ministry of Defense is operating in a closed mode to ensure maximum efficiency and security. And now, the use of a batch of ammunition in the defense forces has been suspended, as well as its issuance to combat units. Everything indicates that regarding the core of the defense, that low-quality 120mm mortar mines have arrived and key troops have significant defects. The key reason is low-quality propellant charges or violations of the conditions for storing ammunition, which led to their damage. The investigation is being conducted by investigators from the State Bureau of Investigation. The ministry promised to make a personnel decision regarding the activities of the Interagency Commission concerning all responsible officials. It was reported that the customer for this type of weaponry for the Ukrainian Defense Forces is the Ministry of Defense, while the executor is the Ministry of Strategic Industries. This scandal received wide coverage in the Ukrainian media, and it is good that so much attention has been drawn to this story. Naturally, journalists and bloggers will actively cover this topic. The most important thing is to identify those responsible for supplying low-quality 120mm mines, which, as we saw in the video, simply do not detonate. Meanwhile, the Washington Post writes about how intensively the administration of outgoing President Joe Biden is working to strengthen Ukraine's position before the Trump administration takes office. In particular, the publication cites Sasha regarding the fact that not all European allies were pleased with the White House's decision to allocate American mine stocks to Ukraine, and there was also some discussion about Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use long-range missile weaponry for military purposes on the territory of the Russian Federation. At the same time, it is often believed that the decision was made incorrectly, that the corresponding decision should not have been issued, while others believe that, on the contrary, Biden issued it too late. By the way, the conservative channel Fox News, which discussed this topic, including Mike Waltz, a future national security advisor to Trump, does not criticize the decision, which is indicative, by Biden to allow the use of American weapons against Russian military targets. He completely ignored this topic, meaning they currently have no clear decision regarding whether this permission will be maintained or revoked. This is important. It creates a sense of strategic uncertainty. Nevertheless, Waltz and other representatives of Trump's transition team spend a considerable amount of time in the public sphere discussing issues related to the conclusion of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Representatives of Trump's transition team insist that this decision must undoubtedly be made with consideration of Ukraine's interests. That is, at the moment, there is no betrayal, and it cannot happen as expected, despite criticism of several appointments. Nevertheless, Mike Rubio, the future Secretary of State, if confirmed by the Senate, as well as Mike Waltz, who does not require Senate confirmation, will definitely become a national security advisor. Nothing extraordinary happens. Both express a rather restrained position and have not cast doubt in any case regarding the conclusion or of peace. Moreover, many commentators on Fox News, particularly Hoffman, a former head of a CIA cell abroad, also stated that we need to prepare for the fact that ending the war will not be easy. This indicates that the Trump administration and those advising it certainly listen to the voices of speakers from Fox News. None of these people will advise Trump to end this war as quickly as possible, thereby condemning Ukraine to unfavorable conditions. On the contrary, they will insist that the war may last for some time. It could go on for quite a while. Despite the stated goals, Trump's campaign promise to end this war within 24 hours is already a firm understanding. By the way, Trump is diligently not commenting on this topic. This is also good. And thank God he has practically stopped touching it. Elon Musk, the most influential person in Trump's circle, is the one who shapes his team and has already become extremely toxic for many advisors of the future president of the USA. Thank God Elon Musk has stopped. Hopefully for a long time, or better yet, he shouldn't do it at all. He has stopped commenting on the Ukrainian track altogether, as he possesses, let's say, quite specific, I would say, knowledge. Narrow and obviously distorting the perspective and vision of ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. They hinder him, and in turn, Elon Musk hinders seeing the situation correctly for future President Trump. Meanwhile, the Russian army delivered a record drone strike on Ukrainian territory. 188 drones were deployed at once, along with 4 ballistic missiles. This was reported by the armed forces of Ukraine. Today, the air forces shot down, as always, almost all flying targets. 95 UAVs were lost in terms of location. That is, they were suppressed by the electronic warfare system. 5 drones flew towards Belarus. 76 drones were shot down over 16 regions of Ukraine. However, the remaining drones hit, including critical infrastructure facilities, particularly in Ternopil, where there was a power outage and water supply disruption. It is also reported that private and apartment buildings have been damaged. As always, Russia continues to strike civilian targets. However, today's sharp increase in this activity indicates that Russia, under Putin, is firmly intent on continuing the destruction, primarily of energy infrastructure, and all these cynical war crimes against the civilian population are being committed against the backdrop of the onset of cold weather. The war is literally against Ukrainian citizens, against the population of the country. They are not fighting against the military. They fight civilians, against women, against children, against elderly Ukrainians, and this should further encourage Western allies in their determination to continue supporting Ukraine. This also applies to the United States. Our opponent has new personnel changes. Not everything is well, due to the dissemination of false information. As reported, the former commander of the Russian group of troops in the south, deployed in the occupied territories of Ukraine, has been removed from command. Colonel General Gennady Anashkin. This happened on November 23rd. Instead of him, Lieutenant General Alexander Sanchik has been appointed as the acting commander of the Russian group in the south. Anashkin was removed due to disinformation and misleading the command. Naturally, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that everything is going according to plan, a planned rotation. All is well. Furthermore, it is reported that Sanchik held the position of commander of the 35th Army of the Eastern Military District and was also the first deputy commander of the troops of the Eastern Military District since 1923. Well, again, this all indicates that the opponent is experiencing problems, including serious issues and loss of command, including in terms of staffing, attrition, and so on. We see that they are trying to resolve everything with such frantic methods. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crash of a DHL cargo plane in Vilnius continues. Flight recorders have been found. They were discovered and extracted from the wreckage of the plane. It is reported that specialists are already working on retrieving information from the black boxes. As previously reported by Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda, there is a possibility of sabotage. It cannot be ruled out. The investigation will continue. However, there is currently insufficient information to determine the exact cause of the plane's crash. It could be a human factor or a technological factor, including sabotage, as stated by the representative of the Lithuanian police, Arūnas Paulauskas. I will repeat once again, one of the versions is that Russia threatened, as reported by Western media, that if permission is granted to strike with long-range Western weapons on Russian territory, Russia threatened to start sabotage in Europe. So far, there is one fatality. Fortunately, the plane fell into the yard of a house. If it had fallen directly on the house, many more people would have died. There were 12 people living in the house. By a happy coincidence, they all survived. That's the news we have for today, friends. Take care of yourselves. Subscribe to the channel. Like, share, and comment on the broadcast. Don't forget to share the video with friends. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the armed forces of Ukraine. Glory to the Ukrainian Special Forces. Glory to the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces. This was Major Taras Berezovets of the Ukrainian Army. Until we meet again, bye-bye.